Verses 1 through 5. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think of yourself more highly than you ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measures of faith that God has assigned. For as in one body we have many members, and not all the members have the same function, so we, who are many, are one body in Christ, and individually we are members one of another.
In our gospel reading for today, we are continuing what we read last week, which comes from the Sermon on the Mount. Last week we read together the Beatitudes, and here is what follows. Let us listen now for the word of God to us. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
It's about 5 years ago, there was an incident on TV. It was just kind of an awkward thing, a weird thing. There had been some hurricanes in Oklahoma, and there was a newscaster in conversation with somebody who had survived it. It was one of those sort of classic hope in the face of destruction pieces, right? We've seen things like that. There's rubble all around. And here the shot is there's a house whose walls are demolished, and then there's carpet that you can see just kind of out in the open. And there's a young mother, and she's got a baby who's about Kate's age. And he's just giggling and talking the whole time. And the newscaster is clearly looking for that feel-good angle, right? The newscaster says, what a lucky thing, or what an incredible thing. You are so blessed. They made a split-second decision, and in the midst of all of this chaos, mom, dad, and the baby are all perfectly safe and okay. And the newscaster says, I guess you just gotta thank God. Do you thank God? And it gets really awkward. I'm actually an atheist, she says. And I don't want to pick on her. She was very sweet about everything. She said, but I don't blame anybody who does thank the Lord. What I want to highlight is that there's no way to tell who's a Christian and who's not a Christian. And there's just kind of a casual assumption that in a certain class of people, that everybody is a Christian. It's just there. It's just present. And it's a problem. Because our ability to fit in has deprived us of the ability to stand out. It is super easy for Christians to fit in America. You don't have to work to take religious holidays off. All of our religious holidays are already days off. Most of those religious holidays have been so absorbed into the wider culture that even people who know nothing about Scripture, the Bible, who don't practice Christianity in their life, still celebrate in the same ways that we do. They still have Christmas trees and Christmas presents. They still eat peeps on Easter, go out trick-or-treating. All of these are religious holidays, but of course they have turned into consumer holidays. Lots of them tend to involve buying and selling a lot of things. We don't have traditions of dress that set us apart. If you wear a yarmulke, you can't pass as a Christian. If you have a bindi on your forehead, you can't pass as a Christian. Or if you're wearing a hijab, you can't pretend that your religion doesn't shape your life in a deep and essential way. If you're wearing Amish plain clothes, people will notice what you do. And they'll see if it's different from what they expect of somebody that looks like you. In fact, there's nothing, as Christianity is practiced by a majority of Christians in the U.S., that distinguishes Christianity from just a regular old do-gooder. And ultimately, this increases the temptation to put on or take off your Christianity when it's convenient. Religion shouldn't be something that we can take off when it's inconvenient, but when you fit in as well as Christians do, you can ignore it sometimes and celebrate it other times, right? And what that means is three things, three problems. The first problem is it means that we don't have to sacrifice for our faith if it's not convenient. If you're wearing Amish plain clothes to work every day, and your boss says, I would like to invite a client out to a strip club for a celebratory dinner, you're not going. But if you're not, maybe you go along to get along. You've got bills to pay. You can't lose this job. You can be quiet. And it means that even when we want to sacrifice for our faith, we are not particularly equipped to do it. We don't have the exercise in willpower of practicing our faith. If you have to go on 2 buses and then walk for 15 minutes so that you can get to a butcher who serves kosher meat, you are used to making sacrifices for your faith. And you are much more ready to make sacrifices for your faith when it counts, because you have been exercising constantly. If you pray 5 times a day, you are used to setting aside time for God. And when you pray 5 times a day, it is much easier for you to set aside time for God for other things beyond prayer. If you had to choose between the Friday call to prayer at the masjid and going out to get a decent job that involves working weekdays, if you've made that choice already, you're not afraid of what other costs it might take. You're not going to pretend not to be a Christian so you don't bother somebody. You're not going to pretend that you don't care when you see somebody doing something inconsistent with your faith. Being able to fit in makes it really, really easy to blend in. And our ability to fit in is hampering our ability to stand out. Now, on the other hand, I mentioned a lot of people of minority faiths, right? Their faiths, practiced in the U.S., require distinctiveness. That requires that they are separate from the culture in significant ways and in insignificant ways. And so they always have the exercise of choosing their faith over what everybody else is doing. When you fit in, you don't get that exercise because you never have to make that choice between my faith and what everybody else is doing. Now, the world is changing. And I think we are increasingly coming to a time in which practicing Christians are a minority faith. 80% of people in the United States say they believe in some sort of deity, some sort of God, some sort of spiritual being beyond themselves. 20% of people in America have their bottoms in a pew like you do. Which means there's a vast realm of people who have some belief in God but don't have any interest in doing anything about it. And it is very, very easy for the rest of us to, when we leave from this place, go and join the ranks of those who have some sort of beliefs but don't have any plans to do anything. But when you are a member of a minority community, when preserving your faith is something you have to work on each and every single day, you have a much better ability to resist the temptation to go along to get along. You're much more capable of sacrificing for your faith. Now we see this in the Bible. There's a time in the Bible called the Persian period. It's the time when the people of God are in Babylon, and then some of them return to Jerusalem, and some of them stick around. And all of these passages in the Persian period, the book of Daniel, the story of Esther, the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, all of these stories come from a time in which it suddenly became very, very important to preserve themselves as distinct from the rest of the culture. There are traditions that become significantly more popular. They used to sacrifice in the temple when people lived in Jerusalem, but you can't sacrifice in the temple when people live in Babylon. One, you're in Babylon, and two, the temple's been destroyed. And so other practices of distinctness start to get adopted. That's when Sabbath observance becomes really, really important. It's when circumcision becomes really, really important. It's when festivals like Passover that can be done in your own home as opposed to having to go to Jerusalem to celebrate become really important. Because in order to survive as a minority faith in a majority world, you have to work harder to protect to protect your faith, to practice your faith. And that gives you the strength to be an incredible practitioner of faith. That's why Daniel is not afraid to go in the lion's den, because he has been working every week to practice his faith. It is not a very big step for him to say, I worship God, I won't worship the king. The same goes for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They have set aside their Saturdays for all of their lives. It's not such a big stretch for them to say, I will not bow down to a king. So the problem with being able to fit in as a Christian is our ability to fit in interferes with our ability to stand out. Is this making sense? I hope this is making sense. And I think that one of the really important things that we can do is we can start to act in a different way. We can start to try to stand out. We can start to practice those things. There are very, very few things that you do that make it obvious that you are a real practicing Christian. I've been thinking about this all week, and I think the only thing is ashes. Everything else fits in with the rest of sort of modern American Christian culture. You got a Christmas tree in your house. I know Jewish people have Christmas trees in their homes. It's not distinct, but if you got ashes on your forehead, that means you were in a church worshiping God, and you went out of your way to do it. It wasn't a part of your regular routine. The practices of Lent are practices of strengthening our discipline. We like to give up chocolate because we think it's going to make us thinner. Like kind of two birds with one stone. I'll get closer to God, and I'll get closer to my ideal weight. But the real reason that we do that practice is, the practices like fasting, is so that we are strong enough when God calls us to do something bigger than giving up chocolate. We've been exercising our giving up things muscle. And if we have been exercising that muscle, we are so much more capable of doing it. Now, it sounds like a dangerous thing. It sounds like kind of an awful thing to be distinct in a world that doesn't necessarily agree with Christianity. But it does a few things. One, it gives us that strength of muscle, right? Two, it gives us the ability to proclaim the gospel in a meaningful way. And 3, I guess this is kind of backwards, but always blending in, having a Christianity that is no distinction between Christianity and American culture, protects powerful people who would like to claim the benefits of Christianity without ever having to accept the obligations of Christianity. The phrase for that is sort of cheap grace. We like to proclaim that we are loved and forgiven. We don't ever like to have to do the things that it takes to be a Christian in the modern world. And so when everybody can say they're a Christian, and when there's no sort of telltale sign that distinguishes between somebody who is actually a Christian and somebody who is just sort of proclaiming themselves to be a Christian, then if you are powerful, you can say, I'm a Christian, and you can do whatever you want. And nobody can challenge you because there's no clear way of knowing. That's why being distinct matters. But here's the thing. The church, the faith of God, absolutely thrives when people choose to be distinct. When people choose to be distinctly Christian, to set and make clear the distinctions between walking in the path of Christ and walking in the path of everybody else, the church benefits, Christianity benefits, the gospel benefits. I was sitting down for a Sunday school class on the different nationalities of Presbyterians. Why is it that Presbyterians have so many Korean people? And the teacher of this was a Korean Presbyterian, and one of the things that he said was that there was a time in Korea of intense persecution for people who were Christian. And there were a lot of people who were renouncing their Christianity, people who had converted to Christianity, but then it got dangerous, and they stopped. There were a number of Presbyterian ministers, however, who absolutely refused to abandon their faith. Missionaries that had gone to Korea, that had made the choice to serve God in that place, and who refused, under penalty of torture and death, to abandon their faith. Well, that time of persecution ended. And when it became legal again to be a Christian, people flocked to the Presbyterian church because they knew this was a church that believed something enough to die for, that cared enough to make itself distinct from other communities. The church thrived because somebody decided that being a Christian was more important than being safe, than fitting in with the rest of society. Christian history is littered with people like this, with moments in which the church set itself against the wider culture and thrived because of it. I'm talking about St. John Chrysostom. He is a way old guy who's way more interesting than I ever thought. He was around in the 3rd and 4th centuries AD. He preached in Antioch. He became famous for being such a great preacher. He preached the gospel in a practical way that people could understand. And he became such a great preacher, so many people were flocking to his church, that the bigwigs up in Constantinople, that's where the seat of the Roman Empire was, they wanted him in Constantinople. They kidnapped him. This is actually a kind of a common thing for at least for the stories of the saints of God, is these people wanted to serve humbly in the place where they were, and they were forced to become leaders of the church. And all of these rich and powerful Christians were so excited to have this incredible preacher come and proclaim the gospel until he started preaching the gospel against rich and powerful Christians. He started going after the wealthy. He started going after the greedy, and immediately they had to get rid of him. They banished him, they exiled him, but they couldn't exile him far enough because people in Constantinople heard the gospel that he proclaimed. People flocked to the church where he had been, and Christians, poor Christians, heard this message that you can't come to the altar in silk clothes and then ignore your neighbor in rags. And people wanted more and more and He made himself distinct. Now, I've told some stories in history, and I want to tell you that this is something that goes on even now. I was in Austin, and I met the pastor of a church called Central Presbyterian Church in Austin, Texas. And in the 90s, Central Presbyterian Church was like a lot of historic downtown churches. It had a whole lot of history, but it wasn't living up to that history. And it was in a pattern of sort of slow, long-term decline that a lot of churches are familiar with, right? There's just a few less people, a little bit less money each and every year, and there wasn't any distinctness to their vision. Well, in the late 90s, the leadership of that church heard the call of the Holy Spirit. God spoke in that place, and what God spoke was, we want you to be a church where everyone is welcome. And they made the choice to be an open and affirming church in Texas in the late 90s, right around the time of Defense of Marriage Act. And they said, we are going to be a place that welcomes and includes gay, lesbian, bi, transgender people, everybody. And do you guys know what happened? Well, they lost pretty much everybody. They went from a church of 400 to maybe having 50 people on the rolls. Giving dropped, membership dropped, and they were terrified, right? But slowly things started to turn around because they had made themselves distinct, because they had proclaimed the gospel that God loves everyone. The same thing our choir sung to us, right? That you are a child of God no matter what people say. People wanted to be a part of that congregation. And over the next 10 years, they went from a church of 50 to a church of 450. They got even bigger because people wanted to hear what they had to say because they took a stand when it mattered. And now they are this incredible, thriving community of God. They run a weekly breakfast ministry where they say it's more important that we sit down with each other and understand each other and get to know each other over a meal than it is that we just have this meal. They distribute clothes to people who need clothes to people who need something to wear for an interview. They are the place for refugee communities in Central Austin. They say, when refugees say, I'm going to church, what they mean is I'm going to Central Presbyterian Church for ESL classes. And they run their nursery by hiring people from refugee communities to give them a leg up, a little bit of stability so that they can ensure that. And all of this is possible because they made the choice to be distinct. Jesus said to us, you are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its saltiness, it has become useless and gets thrown under the ground. Jesus said to us, you are the light of the world. But you don't hide your light under a bushel basket. For Christianity to be Christianity in the future, we have to adopt the idea of a minority community that preserves, protects, and defends its distinctness, that sets itself in contrast with a world that rejects Christ by loudly proclaiming, this is who we are, this is how and why we are different from the rest of the world. And if we do that, we will find that just like so many Christians who walk this path of faith before us, that the gospel will thrive in this place because we have made clear the difference between salt that has preserved its saltiness and salt that has lost its taste. Because we have refused to hide our light under a bushel basket. Because we have gone out into the world as the salt of the earth, as the light of the world, loudly proclaiming and bearing witness to this incredible, radical love that Jesus has for us. In the name